Welcome to our community's leading climate action Zoom workshop. So good evening, my name is John Shiel and I'll be your MC tonight. Please note we are recording this session for those who cannot make it. If you have privacy concerns, please turn off your video and or change your name using the menu at the top right of the screen. So welcome to this unique event where we have experts speaking from 3 of Australia's most influential, independent and grassroots climate change organisations. Please type your questions into the chat sessions and we'll combine them so that our experts will answer them. Hopefully you will find out what actions you can do to make a big difference about climate change. But first I would like to introduce Amy Meehan from BCD Newcastle for an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. My name's Amy Meehan. I'm a Gamilaroi Irish Australian from Maitland, New South Wales, and a volunteer. I'd like to take a moment, and I hope you will join me, to acknowledge and be thankful for the wisdom and care of our ancestors and custodians past and present on whatever country, Indigenous country that you are in Australia tonight. I'm thankful to the ancestors of the Warramai land I grew up on and the Wonnarua land where I live and work. I thank my elders for the gender parity and the natural democracy of not only people but all creatures without a voice through totemic systems and songlines. I thank them for caring for this land for 120,000 years, despite unresolved sovereignties. I also would like to thank you for being here, for caring about this land and its climate. To Greg, Dennys, Imogen and John, and the 3 organisations for coming together. All voices from all cultures are needed. And because I know something of minorities, I also want to express thankfulness for another minority, Australia's coal, oil and gas workers. We have all benefited from the energy and technology of their work, and I hope together we can sympathise with and support their challenges as well as our own. Feel free to acknowledge the custodians of the land where you are in the Zoom chat. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Amy. So I'd like to introduce Greg Mullins. Greg's a climate counsellor at the Climate Council of Australia and received an award of an Order of Australia in 2018 following his distinguished service as Commissioner of Fire and Rescue New South Wales. At Fire and Rescue, Greg changed the culture with reforms such as taking affirmative action for 50-50 male-female recruitment, increasing Indigenous employee representation, and introducing water-saving systems, robotics, and real-time tracking and dispatching of fire engines. Now Greg is retired, but he volunteers as Deputy Group Captain in the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and more recently founded the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action Group. We apologise for some difficulties we had with the first few minutes of this recording, but here are Greg's first few slides.
Contribute to a national disaster fund via a levy. Now, this is well established internationally that if you cause harm, you have to make restitution. And I think I've forgotten the company who made asbestos, James Hardy, and asbestos. Now, as a young firefighter, we still had the asbestos suits and asbestos blankets that we used to use and a number of my colleagues have spots on their lungs, etc. I haven't so far, and I hope it stays that way, but will be compensated if we become ill. And we've known for decades that carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases cause harm. Everybody saw it last summer, and we believe that that's something that the industry should be paying for. Now, what's happened with bushfire threat? We've had a long-term drying and heating, or heating and drying trend, more heat waves, stronger evaporation, so it's all there. That drives a hotter atmosphere, drives more extreme weather events. It makes the atmosphere more unstable. Now that leads to extreme fire weather and extreme fire behaviour. And I'll talk about last fire season shortly, but nobody has ever seen fires like them before. And it's outside the realms of human experience. And I've had people from overseas calling me saying, look, can you get me information, because we saw it, but we didn't believe it. Now, more days of bad fire weather every year. Just to give you an idea, in 2019, spring, there were 21 days of very high fire danger and above, just in spring, just in New South Wales. Now, the previous high was 2001, 11 days, but the average from 1950 was just 2 days. So that's the magnitude of the changes we've seen. Much longer fire seasons. So New South Wales fire season's supposed to go from October to March, 1st of October to 31st of March. In 2018, we had fires in early August, and then in April in Holsworthy, you might remember, after 69 homes were destroyed in late March in Tathra, the worst fire weather they've ever had down there until this year, or last season, and the latest in the season they'd ever had it. Now, in 2019, we had fires in July, and they went until Mother Nature decided to give us a break, and it rained in February, because the fires were not able to be extinguished by human intervention. Overlapping fire seasons means we can't share firefighting resources like we used to. They used to be sequential. They'd moved south from Queensland. When their fire season ended, New South Wales would start. When New South Wales ended, Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia would start. So that we now have fires simultaneously. Dry thunderstorms, particularly in Tasmania, where they were virtually unknown, but 2016, thousands of lightning strikes, hundreds of fires started by dry storms. 2018, the same thing. This last season, most of the large fires were caused by lightning, not by arsonists, as some politicians would try and have us believe in some parts of the media. And fire-generated storms. Now, just to give you an idea of that, I haven't got time to go into detail, but pyrocumulus or pyrocumulonimbus clouds, so storm clouds caused by fires in unstable atmospheres. You'll see the smoke column turn into a storm cloud. This is very simple the way I'm putting it, but so it will become a storm, it'll generate lightning, but there's usually not enough water vapour to generate rain. So those lightning strikes can start new fires 20, 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. But they also cause incredible downdrafts, wind squalls, cyclonic winds. And we saw one firefighter was killed near the ACT when their 8-tonne fire truck was picked up and dumped on its roof by a downdraft from one of these storms. Now, between 1978 and 2001, there were 2 confirmed events in Australia and 2 possibles. This last season, we had dozens. I think it's 45 with others being investigated. My father talked about seeing one in 1939. I think I saw one in 1975. Now I've seen many. I was out there fighting the fires. So fires are burning where they've never burned before. Rainforest, ancient Gondwana rainforest that's not adapted to fire, and our methods of fighting fires no longer work. So this last season, it was our worst season ever by far. 11 million, depending who you talk to, 11, 12, 18 million hectares burned, 21% of eastern broadleaf forest. Now the average each year is about 3%. 3,100 homes destroyed, so 1,100 more than our worst previous fire in Australia, which was 2009, Black Saturday, and about 6,000 other buildings, schools, petrol stations, shops and farm buildings. 34 people killed directly by fires, 417 by smoke. Now, is it any wonder 2019 was our hottest, driest year ever recorded, our worst fire weather ever recorded, many, many days of catastrophic and extreme fire danger. And the earliest day, 6th of September, catastrophic fire weather in Queensland and New South Wales. So
that was 5-minute warning, Bidoli.
Oh, okay, all right, thanks. 20 years of reduced rainfall. You can see there large increases in fire danger since 1978, right across the country. Now, the bit circled, the blue there, this is a bell curve, a weather bell curve. Climate change is shifting everything to the right. I call that orange bit where it says more record hot weather and more hot weather, that's the wedge. That's what we're just edging into. And this is a bit over 1 degree warming. Imagine 3 degrees, which is what some scientists are saying we're actually heading for. So it's really frightening. This is the sort of stuff that we're dealing with. 2 of those photos I took at fires I was at during the summer. What's happening around the world? I was in California in November at the Kincaid fire in Sonoma County. I've fought a lot of fires in California over the years. I've been to Spain, France, Canada. They lost 20,000 homes in 2018 and 100 lives. The year before, 10,000 homes. Previously, a big season in California was 4,000 to 5,000 homes, so exponentially worse. Greece, France, Spain, Portugal, all getting worse. And we're getting fires in countries that have never had bushfires before, like the UK, Greenland, and Siberia. So it's just worsening. Look, what it boils down to, we need to do a lot for community resilience, relocating at-risk communities, access to insurance. That's all in our plan. But if we don't do anything about emissions, we're dooming future generations because we can't handle it now and it can only get worse. One thing that people can do, the Cities Power Partnership. Now, that's a project supported by the Climate Council, 129 local councils covering over 300 towns and cities, 50% of the Australian population. Now, it's our largest Australia's largest network of cities and towns tackling climate change, from small regional towns to large metropolitan cities. They pledge 5 actions to tackle climate change locally, from ramping up renewable energy through to planning sustainable transport systems. So it gives local government the tools, connections and momentum to take bold action on climate change. And it's been estimated that just through actions at local government level, we could do 70% of what's required to meet the Paris Agreement, to keep us to 2 degrees. And there's a link, there'll be one at the end, but you can nominate your council. So please do that. Get your council on board. My local council, Northern Beaches, is very much on board and very proud of that. And they're doing lots of different things. So I think my time's up, John, or just about up. Why am I so committed to this? Here's a couple of photos of me. That's me at Bateman's Bay on New Year's Eve on the right there, or the left of the right-hand photo. I'm the person on the left. The one in the middle is me at Blackheath on the 22nd of December. And the other photo is my last day on the job in Fire and Rescue New South Wales after nearly 40 years. And that's my grandson. And that's who I'm worried about, because he's going to inherit an incredibly dangerous world. And I don't want our Prime Minister and some of the people who work in Canberra, who I pay for and employ, to stuff this planet along with people like Donald Trump. So we have to take action. and make these people realise that they work for us and we actually care about the future. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for that. That great talk. Sorry, a few things are happening wrong here, but that's fine. Yeah, look, I'd like to now introduce Dennys Angove. So Dennys is the Honorary Barara Electric Group Leader for Citizens Climate Lobby, and he lectures in greenhouse gas emissions at the universities of UTS and University of New South Wales, and also at WEA and other venues. Formerly, Dennys was Principal Research Scientist at the CSIRO in the field of atmospheric science, managing a laboratory to study tropospheric ozone and secondary organic aerosol formation. So I'd like to welcome Dennys. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just trying to get this organised here. Things always just a little slow. Okay, are we there, John? I guess we are. Okay, thank you very much, John, and thank you, Greg, for that, well, interesting talk. It sort of led me down an interesting path of thought. For those who don't know me, my name is Dennys Angove. As John just said, I acknowledge the Darug and Gurindji people who are traditional owners of the lands of the Hornsby Shire where I live. Although I'm a retired CSIRO atmospheric scientist, this presentation is not about science. It's essentially an invitation to people to become involved or continue in a positive way towards achieving a climate solution. And my CCL career, if you like, I joined the CCL as a volunteer in 2014, and I'm currently, as John said, the CCL group leader for the Barara Electric. So that was my personal introduction. So 2 slides down, that's pretty good. Okay, now about Citizens Climate Lobby. We exist to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power. We are, hang on, I've got you guys in the way here. I can't see my own.
You can change the gallery view, and you can move the slider along to the right.
I've done it. All right. So CCL Australia is a non-profit, non-partisan grassroots advocacy and education organisation, and we're focused on accelerating climate change solutions through democracy. We promote solutions that will be effective in reducing carbon emissions as well as driving a transition away from fossil fuels and towards a zero emissions future that is needed for Australia and our planet. So essentially, CCL is about overcoming barriers to achieving our climate solution. CCL structure. So it's a global organisation with 54 countries we're in now. It was started in the United States in about 2007, and our founder was Marshall Saunders, who's now left us, unfortunately. He was a wonderful human. It's volunteer driven. We're organised in groups or chapters, and in Australia we tend to use the term groups, although some folks still use chapters. Those chapters or groups are structured on or are correlated with federal electorates. We have a national board, we have state coordinators who do the coordination, and we have group leaders. Now the group leader or a chapter leader is a person who leads a team which corresponds to a team in a federal electorate, and that's full of volunteer members. So at the moment we have 3,000 supporters, and we have 200 wonderful active volunteers who work like crazy because they love to do it. We have national conferences, and I think our next national conference is coming up by Zoom in November. Normally they're in Canberra, so people travel from all over Australia to go to them. We have regional conferences as well. We have a monthly speaker, which can be really, really a positive experience. We have group meetings, so these meetings occur at the electorate level, and it's made up of a team of, and then we have outreach and training. So the outreach is about going out into the public or to anyone who we can actually move towards a climate solution, and the training course looking after ourselves. And if you want any more information at this time, you can contact Joyce or Catherine at that email address. So CCL values and methodology. So what I'm going to show you now is some things that we do which really apply to anyone who wants to go and be involved in any worthwhile contact with a representative or someone of distinction who you need to talk to. So the values and methodology tend to merge. So in CCL, we are non-partisan. We are open to all who are serious about climate change. We work with MPs and leaders from across the political spectrum. And I have to say that's been very, very interesting and sometimes exciting. Focus. We are focused on what we see as the most impactful solution to climate change, which is a carbon fee and dividend policy. Now, that said, we are pragmatic in our approach, and we know this will not solve the problem entirely, and we appreciate the work that all other organisations are doing. Relationships. It's really important to have the relationship with the people you want to talk to. We listen, we work to find common values, we endeavour to understand our own biases. So confirmation biases are a thing that troubles a lot of people. It's belief structures instead of facts. We are honest and firm. We know that there is a place for protest, but our approach is to build consensus. Optimism. We are optimistic, like the dung beetle. We believe that people are good and that democracy works. We are confident in this approach because we see progress, and we have seen progress in Australia. We stand for a solution, not in protest of other solutions. We don't expect perfection from ourselves or others, so we try. Integrity. We do our research. We're always on time for our meetings, and our approach is thoughtful and thorough. We consult experts and utilise data. We are open to new information. We refine our solutions to make them better. And importantly, we always follow up when we're asked. This is important to maintain the relationship or the connection. Diversity. We endeavour to empower everyone in exercising their personal and political power, regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, ability, or political affiliation. We seek out, support, and elevate people whose voices may not have been fully heard. Personal power is really important to us. We use our voices to be heard. This simple act transforms us from spectators to engaged citizens, and it reveals the true nature of democracy to us. We are volunteer-driven, and we trust our volunteers to ethically engage in building political will. Political will is important for CCL, so we have tools, and these tools can be used by anyone else. But we call them the 5 levers. And the 5 levers are, the first one, lobbying. Now, lobbying is not everybody's cup of tea. So as a CCL member, you can pick what lever best suits you. So lobbying is about developing productive relationships, having effective meetings with representatives, maintaining liaison. Some people maintain liaison strongly, and we're always ethical. Media relations. We have people who write the most wonderful letters. And when we first started, those letters, I have to say, were naive, but now they are so informed and so well written. We have opinion pieces in media. We have social media, Facebook and Twitter, and we also have folk who have done radio and TV programs as well. Grassroots outreach. So this is really important. Tabling in the public speaking, speaking to societies, organising events and campaigns. Campaigns are really important to us. Now, one of the campaigns that we had successfully run was the setting up of the Parliamentary Friends and Climate Action in federal parliament, which was gazetted in October 2018. That came out of the CCL initiative. Grass tops outreach. We identified Meet community and civic leaders. We worked with local councils, and this ties in with what Greg was talking about. We have endorsements and we educate. And one of the endorsements we got was by Bill McKibben, I think in 2013, who said he really loved working with CCL because we are relentless in our quest for carbon fee and dividend, which drives the debate forward in the correct direction. And we are relentless. And most importantly, we try to develop ourselves, our own group or our own chapter. We host meetings. Now, these meetings may be every month, it may be according to whatever the team decides is best for them. We participate in conferences, we improve our communications, and we mentor our new volunteers. So why focus on a national carbon fee and dividend? Well, simply carbon dioxide formed by the combustion of fossil fuels is a principal driver of modern climate change. And the word modern here is really important. Therefore, an effective and fair policy is needed to control greenhouse gas emissions. An original study by the Public Policy Group, REMI, in the United States in 2014 showed that in the US, a carbon fee and dividend would reduce carbon dioxide emissions 52% below 1990 levels in 20 years, which is pretty amazing. Their modelling further showed that if the dividend revenue was recycled in the US, it would create an economic stimulus that added 2.8 million jobs to the economy and enable business planning and investment priorities to cope with the transition. The other thing that was expected to improve was air quality. It was expected to prevent in excess of 250,000 premature deaths in the US alone. And in New South Wales, people don't realise that the minimum estimate of health costs in New South Wales to air quality challenges is in the order of $1 billion. This is readily available, and if you need it, contact me. And it's more likely to be closer to $4.7 million per year. So the carbon fee and dividend is a policy with three legs. Basically place a fee on fossil fuels at the source, which is the mine well or the port. It starts at $15 a tonne carbon dioxide equivalent and increases annually. You return the net revenues to households equally, protecting lower and middle class. And then there are border adjustments on goods imported from or exported to countries without an equivalent price on carbon. Now, this is actually currently in place. I think it was put in November. I can't remember the name of it now. Oh, not in front of me. Carbon Dividend Innovation Carbon Act, I think, in US Congress. So how does it work? How does the carbon price work? Well, in Australia, the carbon price tax worked while it was in place. And over here, there's a graph. You can see this graph as we've got axis carbon dioxide equivalent. We've got a year across here. There's ALP period, correlation period, ALP period, and coalition period here. The blue line is the total greenhouse gas emissions as per the audit. If we take land use and forestry out of that, we end up with the green line, which is essentially really mainly about carbon emissions from combustion of or production of carbon fuel. And you can see here that we had rise, flatten off in the APL period, and then there was a reduction. So that was during the carbon tax period. The other thing I want to point out is that this notion that we have to get below a 2005 target is based upon this up here, which includes land use and clearing and forestry, and not down here, which is really about carbon emissions, which is rather a cheat in my view, a personal view I might add. So since it was repealed, there's not been an effective policy in place that has reduced total greenhouse gas emissions. And in a recent study in May 2020 of 142 countries by the Centre for Climate and Energy Policy at ANU, they found that carbon pricing reduced emissions on average by 2% per annum, in contrast to nations without carbon pricing, we saw emissions increase on average by 3% per annum. And as a result of a lobby meeting, we were able to be involved in a loose way with the launch of the Australian Carbon Dividend Plan. And basically from the CCL's connection point of view, it all came from a lobby meeting. And CCL now endorses this Australian Climate Dividend Plan, which came out of the University of New South Wales Grand Challenge program, easily available. So this is it. I'm not going to go into great detail. There's 4 components. There's carbon tax, carbon dividend, border adjustment, and the rollback of subsidies. So if the Australian Climate Dividend Plan was in place, then an average income household of 2 parents and 2 adults and 2 children, after all consumption and all energy use, would be $585 per annum better off. And the bottom quintile would be $1,305 per annum better off. So, growing Australia's CCL community. If you like our values, methods and policy, we need more volunteers. We need to grow from 3,000 to 30,000 and beyond. If you want to get involved, you can find your own depth, okay? If you get to a point where you want to do more, we urgently need more group leaders. We need to take it well and truly. And the reason why we need more group leaders is we need to build political will for a climate action or for a climate solution across the whole country. And in CCL, there's no fee to join CCL. So here we have a regional conference with 43 smiling faces down in Canberra in February of last year, and they were a happy bunch. And if you're interested in communities moving forward, then by all means contact one of us, one of the organisations in this talk, to let us know that you are and would like to do something. And you can do that almost immediately if you can submit your email address and local council area in the chat. If that's not your thing and you're interested in CCL, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. You can join online at that email, at that web address and have a bit of a think about it. If after thinking about it you need more information, then you can simply email Joyce or Catherine on that address and away you go. Now, sometimes I get caught in the mud and it's hard to see a way forward, and other people are like that. And what I do these days, I have a sign above my desk, and it was by Stephen Hawking, who knows more about what I'm going to say than anyone else. And Stephen Hawking said, intelligence is the ability to adapt. And I think that is what it's all about. And I have to say, thank you for listening.
Great. Thanks, Dennys, for that. That was very good. Thanks, Ron, sharing. Yeah, so look, we'd now like to introduce Imogen Jubb. Imogen's our National Manager of Beyond Zero Emissions Zero Carbon Communities Program. So Imogen was the author of the Busy Zero Carbon Communities Handbook, and she established the Zero Carbon Communities Investment Reference Group. Imogen's been previously working on climate science communications and solutions with the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Bureau of Meteorology, and CSIRO. So we're very lucky to have Imogen on the team. So welcome, Imogen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for tuning in tonight and listening to all these organisations telling you a little bit about what they're up to. Can you all see my screen? Is that up there? Great. So Beyond Zero Emissions is where I work. And for those of you who don't know, Beyond Zero Emissions is a think tank. Been working on climate change, energy and solutions for over 10 years. We show how Australia can thrive through a transition to a zero carbon economy. And we've been nominated for, well, won a few awards. So we won the International Energy and Environment Think Tank Prospect Awards, and last year we won the Premier Sustainability Awards. We've done a lot of work across different sectors. So looked at energy, land use, transport, waste, and most recently across manufacturing and how industry can get to zero emissions. And we are now also moving into place-based work. And that's a little bit more about what I do. So we do research and look for opportunities and look at regional economies and how that they can transition effectively. We work with communities to help implement plans and realise opportunities. So not only do we do the research that show that it's possible, we actually work hand in hand with people who are trying to make those changes happen on the ground. And we work with businesses and industry to help support them through these changes as well. My work is with the Zero Carbon Communities initiative, and the vision of Zero Carbon Communities is to have an ever-growing network of communities working across Australia to get to zero emissions. And that vision is starting to come true. We now have over 80 different communities all across Australia who are figuring out the local ways that they can actually transition to zero emissions. We'd love to see more communities pop up on this map, and you can play a role in that, because most of these have started with a group of a small group of committed people really wanting to drive change in their local area. So if you're interested, you can be one of those people too. We help those communities. We provide resources. So we've just released an update to our Zero Carbon Communities Guide. So if you have a look on our website, you can flick through that, and it has case studies of about 20 different communities all across Australia who are working in this space. We also outline different steps to take to help you get towards zero emissions. So it kind of breaks it down into a bit of a standard process, which helps guide people along the way. We've also just done a national release of the Snapshot climate tool, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But that effectively gives every community or every person everywhere in Australia access to local emissions data, so you can tell what your starting point is and take it from there. We've also done work with local councils. So we've done a climate review of every local council in Australia to look at their climate policies and actions. And we're just about looking at doing a repeat of that process so we can build on that track record and see what's changed over the last couple of years. And we've also recently released our Million Jobs Plan. And this has had really wide traction and sort of changing the tone about what's possible. So rather than the costs of dealing with emissions, we're looking at what are the jobs, and particularly what are the jobs in your local area that will help make this help drive this transition, help improve your community, help build the economy, help find good quality jobs that will make your communities better in all sorts of ways. So that report is also available on our website if you want to download it and take a little bit further. So this information is the Snapshot climate tool. And I'm really quite excited about this piece of work. When I first started working with Zero Carbon Communities, there were only 4 of them. The first one was Byron, and Byron spent a lot of time trying to figure out this data for their community. So community volunteers were digging into, contacting energy companies and contacting farmers in the region and trying to work out how to provide their emissions baseline. So what we've done now is actually worked with a team at Ironbark Sustainability, who actually helped write the global protocol for greenhouse gas emissions. So this information matches the international standards for how you report on greenhouse gases. And we've provided information for all sectors. So you can see energy emissions, you can see transport emissions, waste emissions, and agricultural emissions. So this is an example from Fremantle in WA. This example is from Whyalla in South Australia. They've actually got quite similar profiles, even though they're in different parts of the country. You can break down, so the electricity component of the emissions is about 50% in this particular community. Transport is the next biggest one at about 32%. Waste is only 3 to 4%. Gas is about 10%, and the land use emissions are quite small. This is in contrast to a community in Queensland, Winton, where agriculture is actually 60% of the emissions of that particular community, and energy and transport are reasonably small. So those communities are going to need different types of strategies to address emissions in their region. And so, you know, without that baseline information, you might not know that, or you might not be able to make as good decisions about what actions you want to take in your particular local area. So we're really excited about how local communities can use this information to drive their decision making, to drive conversations with their council, so that, you know, communities can go to the council and say, hey, look, this is actually what our patch is responsible for. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to tackle our energy emissions? How are we going to tackle our transport emissions? And it provides a year-on-year record to see how your progress is being made. And we also know that we will be constantly improving the data available. So for example, you can see that the electricity emissions are broken down into residential, commercial and industrial emissions. And we will soon also be able to break down transport emissions. So you'll be able to see what transport emissions come from public transport, from car use, from aviation, from freight examples. So breaking it down like that will really help in terms of making effective decisions about what you as a community can do around this stuff, what you as a council can do about it, and actually what are the things that are out of your control and what will you need to hassle your state or federal government to make changes about as well. This one's in Mildura. So just to give an example, you know, they're available in for every single local council in Australia. You can just go onto the Snapshot climate site, click a button and find your own local profile. And we also have a new nifty share function. So there's a little share button up there, and if you press that, it'll pop up with a nice graphic that you can put on social media, and ping it to your local councillors, or ping it to your sustainability team in your council, or ping it to other people in your area who are interested in this stuff, and use that to drive momentum and, you know, conversations going forward. I'm also really interested in how we can use this information to tie in with the Million Jobs Plan, and how can you translate this information into jobs in your local area. So what will it take to reduce emissions in your particular patch, and how many jobs will it create in your particular patch? So we also work with investors. So you can have the best plan in the world to reduce your emissions, but if you can't bring money into it, it doesn't make much difference. So we're working really hard to develop better pathways so that money can flow to communities who are driving this change, so that we can better support projects that are identified by communities, better build up the business cases for them, and better let the money flow to those communities. So we have a really great group of investors, and they are learning a lot about communities, and our communities are also learning a lot about the investment process and how we can break down the barriers between those two different ways of thinking. And it's a really exciting project to be working on in that regard as well. There's certainly a lot of groups willing and interested in putting their financial resources behind this kind of process. So the Million Jobs Plan was released, I think in June, a few months ago, and it's had enormous traction and is helping change the conversation around what people think is viable in dealing with this challenge. BZE has always been about working on the solutions. We know the problem, we know that it's out there, but the solutions are also out there, and they're ever increasing in economic viability. They're ever increasing in, community support. So it's, how do we turn Australia into a renewable energy superpower? Because we can do it. We have all the resources available to make this happen. So zero carbon communities also benefit from the Million Jobs Plan. Over 38,000 jobs were identified through this research by our community consultations. And we had heaps and heaps of communities actually chipping into the research that went behind the million jobs. And for some of you might not know, but Beyond Zero Emissions work is always supported by volunteers. So we've also got over 200 active volunteers at the moment, and many of them have been supporting the research that goes on behind the scenes. They're engineers, they're economists, they're communicators, they're graphic designers, and pulling those skills together in that kind of passionate way has been just fabulous. So you can also volunteer with BZE if you've got great skills to share. And we know that more local jobs and investment will lead to lower energy bills and a healthier community and a healthier environment. So the benefits are well worth fighting for. We've also doing a lot of place-based work at BZE. So again, how do you actually make this transition happen at a local scale? So the first of those bits of work was in Port Augusta over 5 years ago. And South Australia has now become a global standard for the renewable energy transition. We also did a piece of work in Western Australia in Collie, which is the major coal producing area for Western Australia. And there's now projects and investment flowing into that town to support the transition. We've also done, last year, released a piece of work in the Northern Territory with a 10 gigawatt vision, and the Sun Cable project to export renewable energy to Asia has now been granted major project status. So these things, the solutions are actually moving really, really fast, which is great. And this year we're focused in the Hunter, so supporting a really long-standing network of community volunteers, including John and Amy and Stephen and Christine and many others who are here on this call today, who are really championing the change in their local community. And the Hunter region has just got so much for change as well. So the million jobs, we've actually ended up with more than 1 million jobs that we found. So 1.8 million jobs that can help support this transition. So in over 5 years, 1.8 million jobs can be delivered. And most of those jobs will be in regional and rural communities where those jobs are really needed most. 200,000 jobs in renewable energy and transmission, close to 1 million jobs in retrofits and new buildings, 140,000 jobs in electric buses and green transport, 230,000 jobs in manufacturing and mining, and 200,000 jobs in land regeneration and 80,000 jobs in waste and recycling. We also identified education, training and research as a really critical area to enable to support this kind of work in the background. Now, renewable energy underpins the Million Jobs Plan. It provides better buildings, modernising and expanding the manufacturing opportunities in Australia. It allows us to develop 100% renewable mining, electrified transport, 100% recovery of materials, and community-led initiatives such as community power hubs. So renewable energy is the foundation to this plan, but how it can be implemented through better buildings is a really key area. So improving energy efficiency, improving social housing outcomes, creates a lot of jobs, which are spread all across the country. We think we could do 2.5 million energy retrofits and create 500,000 jobs over 5 years. And this would improve every person's home comfort, their home security, their health, and their power bills. They would save a lot of money. So there's benefits all around. And this, like I said, we're focusing our research on the Hunter at the moment. And so we did some detailed case studies. In the Hunter, energy efficiency, home retrofits could create 10,000 jobs over a 5-year period alone. Zero emissions buses. Again, there was a case study in the Hunter where you could create up to 182 long-term jobs until the middle of this century. So there's actually a lot of jobs over that time period. There's also jobs in manufacturing, and I think this is a really key area for Australia at the moment, and that I guess with the COVID situation, it also highlights changes to, I guess, national security around being able to get products and avoid the issues that come with moving people and moving goods around the world at the moment. So there's jobs in electrifying industry, in renewable hydrogen, in renewable mining, and in creating zero emissions metals and processing materials on site rather than sending them offshore for processing. So if you're interested in being involved, you can get involved at the community level, you can get involved as a volunteer, you can nominate the projects that you think are of interest in your particular community. We have a form where people can submit their projects, where we now have over 500 different projects across the country that people are trying to champion. You can do advocacy with your local politicians, like through CCL, or you can help develop better policies at the local level. You can share this information with your network, because you in your community are the most trusted people, and talking to people like yourselves, your friends and your family, will have the biggest influence in their perspectives. So talking to them is a really, really important part of the process. And if you're interested, you can join or start a zero carbon community and actually help be one of the exemplar communities on the ground trying to demonstrate this change. I think that's all. Oh no, yeah, this is how you join. You just go to our website and click this button, and then we send you a notification email with all of our resources. So we have a big shared folder of resources that communities can contribute to, and it just helps bring the learning up across the board. And we also do webinars and shared networking, I guess examples a little bit like this between communities. And we're also quite excited because last night the Fight for Planet A show launched on ABC TV, and they said it was the most watched show of the day. And the War and Waste had over 4.3 million viewers, I believe, and we're expecting a surge of interest in this kind of process as a result of the show. And they've developed a great toolkit of resources across the board. So if you're interested in your home, your school, or your community, you can find good resources there as well. So thank you very much for listening. It's really great to have you all here.
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. That was great. Some great insights there, and I'm not sure if you mentioned that Planet A will feature BZD at some point.
Yeah, so the last night's episode featured Dalesford and Zero Net Burn, which is one of the communities who are leading this process as well. So you can take a look there and find out about them. And I believe there's also a short video coming out about the Newcastle Bowls Club. So you should be able to see that too.
Right. All right, so that's great from our speakers. So just recapping there, that Greg was able to give us some great sort of background on City Power Partnership, how it supports the councils, and how that action by all the councils, they can take a lot of action rather than waiting for the states or the federal government to catch up. And then through CCL, you can get into lobbying activities and actually go and talk to your members. For example, recently we were talking with, I think, Pat Conroy and also Tanya Plebisek. So there's that activity you can get involved with to actually directly talk to members about whether they support climate change. Then there's, of course, Beyond Zero Emissions, where if you look at Imogen, what she's shown you there, you can actually just join a group locally and work out what is it you'd like to do and actually take action yourself. So just club together and think about what sort of things you can do. So we're now hopefully have got some questions in the chat session. How are we going with our Google Doc? Is Amy?
Yeah, would you like me to read out the first question?
If you could, please.
Okay, this one's for Greg. Is the Cities Power Partnership plan available to read?
Yes, so the website. So citypowerspartnership.org.au. So it's got a lot of information about what City Powers Partnership does, how to join up, etc. So yes.
Okay. Do you want to take them, Amy? My Google Doc dropped out. That was part of the reboot.
Okay, no problem at all. So the next one is from Edward Carroll. How much collaboration is happening between CCL groups and BZE communities? Perhaps that's for Imogen.
Well, events like this are happening, which is great. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes on between the organisations supporting and collaborating each other. They do have slightly different nuances about what they're trying to achieve. So Cities Power Partnership works directly with councils and council staff. They don't really engage the community. CCL engage politicians specifically. And our work is really about communities driving change and identifying projects that will reduce emissions and developing up the resources that can support communities around that. So they're all interconnected. They all support each other, and they all, we all leverage each other's work and get there better and faster because of it. I think there's certainly more work that we could do to collaborate better and do better strategic alignment of what we do. To be honest, often we're all running so fast, completing our own work, that we don't have the time for those kinds of conversations. But we all recognise the value of them and want to do them more.
And I think
I can say something here if I may. One of the things that we do in CCL is that we have people who belong to CCL who are also members of other groups such as BZE or Doctors for the Environment or Farmers for Climate Action, and we all go in together to see the members or the representatives or the state person or local council or whatever. So it's a combined effort, and if we're going in as CCL, then we might have CCL values as sort of principle, but that means that BZE, or for argument's sake, John's been with me quite a few times, and John will put the BZE case or the transition. So our position leads towards a transition, and BZE is very strong on that, and then John will just finish off the talk with that sort of thing. So very powerful, really.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Did Greg, you want to say anything on that? You're on mute.
Look, just a lot of collaboration in the space, and I suppose different people have different expertise, different interests, and so the different organisations provide them that avenue. But when it all comes down to it, we're all on message and work very well together. So yeah, pick a team, and you're part of the bigger team.
Can I say Adam Clark is on the line? Adam's part of Newcastle Council. Adam, I think, did you put in a link there in the chat session for some of your work? Did you want to unmute yourself for a second, Adam? Are you able to, Adam?
Maybe while we're waiting for him, John, just say that. Oh no, there he is.
Wasn't letting me unmute there. Yeah, thanks, John, just for the minute, and thanks for all the presentations tonight. Just wanted to mention City of Newcastle's Climate Action Plan is on public exhibition at the moment. So yeah, we'd love to see some submissions and gauge the support. So it's a 5-year plan to reduce emissions across the community, and I'll pop the link in there. Thanks.
Can I say that, Adam's done a great job here with 100% renewable energy, and now they're putting forward a council that wants to go to zero emissions in 10 years. Now, this is quite a good step, and if we can get behind it, maybe even ask them for 5 years. A bit like the university. The university's going to zero emissions in 5 years. So let's get behind Adam and give him our support. So thanks, everyone.
So the next question I have here is, how can we align the work of climate action groups to create mass impact? I suppose that's somewhat been answered, how it's that all our 3 groups actually work together, but I suppose coming together like this and perhaps our three speakers would like to speak to how they'd like that collaboration to continue.
I can go first then. So I think it comes back to essentially formalising what we're already doing to some extent and maybe making it more efficient. So CCL is about having an effective carbon price, and an effective carbon price, if put in place, would assist in driving the transition towards what we need. And BZE has a lot of expertise in that area, and Farmers for Climate Action really need it to be done. And so there are the different elements that come together as a plan, but we haven't done a formal plan, and I think it's probably a very good idea to have a summit of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add to that, Greg, or?
Look, I suppose I can't really comment on the broader climate change movement because I've been really head down, tail up, fighting fires, and unfortunately fighting people in Canberra, or not fighting, but trying to get them to listen. But what I'm seeing is a lot more collaboration, and as I said, there's different, not silos, but different expertise, but they're feeding off each other. And a lot of the people listening would have been to the Climate Emergency Conference in Melbourne, and my network grew exponentially down there. So when we had our Bushfire Summit, we had veterinarians for climate action. I'm helping them set up because they've learnt from what we did as emergency leaders, parents for climate action, doctors for climate. So I think the more groups become involved and the more mainstream demands for climate action become, the more politicians will listen, because it's about votes. And, I don't know why this government seems wedded to the fossil fuel industry, and I don't want to speculate and I don't want to be disrespectful, but we've got to create space too for the good people who understand climate in the conservative side of politics like Matt Keane. There's an absolute champion, and he's copping a lot because he's standing up for climate action. We've got to create space, help create space for people like that, and make it mainstream. It should not be political. It's about survival. 3 billion animals burnt to death, and my grandkids will never see what I saw when I used to go camping with my parents as a kid. That's tragic. And I can't imagine Amy, traditional owners, totem animals and everything, that's their life. That's what we're facing. So I suppose I'm just reinforcing, yes, we must work together, and I'm seeing a lot of that happening.
I'll just reiterate, everyone's got a role to play in this, no matter what your personal passions are or your interests or your networks. Like, we need everyone to be part of it. And you are the most trusted voice in your community of people. And so making sure you use your voice with the people that you have influence or connections to is a really critical part of this process. And, joining whatever network supports you the most to enable that is great. But, just speaking up and talking about it is a really key part of it all as well.
Could I just bring in Christine? Christine's our co-lead here in Newcastle. Christine Rogers. Christine, have you?
I just wanted to add a little bit to the talk that Imogen was giving about the million jobs. Next week, our head people from Melbourne are going, not exactly going to Canberra, but talking to people in Canberra about the report. And then, no, maybe it's this week. And then the following week, they're going to be connecting with state politicians. So as it's not something BZE normally gets involved in the politics of it, but in this case, we're using the Million Jobs report to try and educate, coerce, whatever you like to say, the politicians into recognising that it doesn't have to be a fossil fuel-led recovery. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Yeah, can I just say too that we don't have to rely on the federal government solely, as I think Dennys or even Greg were saying, the councils can help as well, and we as groups inside the community can do our own part and pay a big, like, you know, people are doing things like community solar farms and wind farms and all sorts of things. So there's a huge amount of things people can band together and do. So also remember, the New South Wales state government had one of the first carbon prices even before the federal. So, you know, we can put it back to the New South Wales government to ask them why can't they put a carbon price on. So anyway, what's the next question there, Amy?
Yeah, there's an interesting one. A couple of people have asked is what an explanation of renewable mining is.
So yeah, I think it has been answered in the chats. It's basically, rather than, you know, the mining itself isn't necessarily renewable, but it can be powered by renewable sources. So rather than trucking diesel to the mine to power your machinery, you can use renewables to run the machinery or the power plants, whatever actual energy consumption of the mine requires.
And there's another one which is perhaps for Greg. How do fires planned or unplanned impact emissions?
Great question. So look, in a nutshell, what people make the assumption that, or scientists make the assumption generally, that when a fire burns, it causes regeneration, which reabsorbs the carbon dioxide that's been emitted over a period. But there's been some interesting papers on these fires. They were so intense, there was so much biomass destroyed that it probably can't be reabsorbed and over the 10-year period that you might normally expect. So it's usually a zero-based sum that just nets out. But the fires of the magnitude that we're experiencing, because there's so much being burnt and so much being put into the air, the ability of vegetation and oceans to pull it back in is reducing.
Great, thanks, Greg. Amy, have we got any more? You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd pressed it. This one is from, sorry, it has scrolled down due to other messages. It's regarding, Kieran Luke has said, how can renewable energy replace the fossil fuel industry in exports?
I guess the Northern Territory plan was an example of that. So out of that 10 gigawatt vision, a lot of it was for exports to Asia. So, you know, we are the sunniest and windiest country in the world. We have renewable resources that far, far, far exceed our own domestic demand. So developing capacity to export renewables to other countries is, you know, totally feasible. So the Sun Cable project will be the first large one of those. There's also projects in Western Australia that are looking at developing this kind of space. There's also the renewable hydrogen industry, which can be an export product as well.
Great, thanks, Imogen. Amy?
We're starting to get a few more actually. Just scrolling down, does the Million Jobs plan mean that we don't need gas-fired transition, which the government is selling us, which is related, I suppose?
Yeah, no, we don't need a gas-fired transition. We should not have one. It's a really bad idea. It will lock in fossil fuels and emissions for many, many, many years to come. It will mean as other countries become stricter and stricter about, you know, emissions and the trade around emissions, then you know, any domestic product will have associated tariffs with it that will, you know, affect us economically. And we will also have stranded assets as it becomes less and less viable to use gas as a product. And it will, you know, it'll make our emissions profile worse and damage our climate and our environment. So we should not be heading down this track. Unfortunately, the government doesn't have that point of view at the moment, but we're doing our darndest to change their mind.
Can I ask Dennys for a comment on that too, please?
Yeah, if they had a price on carbon, we'd get a transition away from it pretty quickly. but as long as they don't reinforce the gas position. And I think that's one of the problems we have. I think Imogen's sort of right. People are locked into income, perceived income coming from exports. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that we have. But what people don't realise is that there is a reason why we're having problems. And the problem is that we're burning fossil fuels. And we need to make that point clear, that burning fossil fuels cause harm, and those people who cause harm need to pay for that harm, at least.
Yep. No, thanks, Dennis. I don't know if anyone's seen Tim Forsey's presentation to the, I think it's the Independent Planning Commission's talks that are on at the moment. He gave a great précis of maybe about 10 minutes about why coal seam gas is basically so bad in terms of expensive and huge emissions. So if anyone wants to Google Tim Forsey, you'll find, and Tim used to work in that industry, so he knows it backwards. He's an expert chemical engineer. He gave a good presentation. And look, I might, we're getting towards the end, it's 8:20. We have some people on the line who are experts in their other areas too, like Wendy Farmer and David Hood, Caroline Pidcock. So we might be able to bring them into the conversation if they're interested. Amy, what's the next question?
So this one's a good one because we've been talking about the lack of need for gas. Someone has asked, Katrina Barter, can our grid support renewables? And perhaps someone can explain how.
So there needs to be work done to support the grid and the transition lines to enable us to become 100%, renewable powered. So the Million Jobs report actually talks about transmission lines, and that's a key area for the work and the jobs involved. So right this minute, you couldn't flick a switch and turn us all to 100% renewables, but with the right projects and processes in place, we can do it, no problem.
Yeah, perhaps Mark Diesendorf. Mark, are you able to just mention, oh, you disappeared there, Mark. Are you still on the line? Oh, maybe not. I think you just lost him, but that's all right.
Can I suggest that you might be good, John, and perhaps Stephen, since you're our technical crew from Newcastle?
Yeah, how about Stephen? Can you take that one for a minute while I try and get Mark? Are you there, Stephen? He probably can't unmute himself. Anyone find it?
Okay, yeah, so the basic issue is the last 10% of our energy demand. And so the best way to get to 100% renewables is actually to not go to 100%, but to go beyond 100% to 200 or 300%, and to capture the overshoot of energy that happens only for part of the year in storage, whether that be a dam, whether that be a tank full of hydrogen or ammonia, or something like this, or a battery. And then in those times when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, the old retort of the deniers, you can draw on those resources from the storage.
Yeah, great. And the good point made about transmission is the fascinating thing about the Hunter is it has huge transmission lines up to Liddell and Bayswater and across to down at Raring and that. So in fact, that's the place to put heavy industry. If you've already got places where you can go out a little bit to get renewable energy in the sun out west and up north, and also with for wind along the Great Dividing Range or offshore even, you get those areas and you can actually bring that power right back to the Hunter. That's the seat of the power because that's the seat of the transmission lines. So it's a very interesting area, the Hunter. So Amy, do you want to head to the next question?
So is anyone working with the union movement to help address their concerns about job losses during a transition?
So the Hunter is a really good example of that. The place-based work that BZE and many others are doing in the Hunter involves the unions and involves a really large coalition of different organisations who have interests of workers and the community at large at heart. And so having those people at the core of developing plans is really what the theory is about, because if it's a community-led transition, then all the nitty-gritty problems that are involved with that transition get addressed, because the communities know how
I think, have we lost Imogen?
The Sun Cable project. So for the Sun Cable project, why do we have to export all this energy? Why don't we just use it domestically?
so that particular project, there isn't enough domestic demand to swallow the amount of energy that could be produced. So, you know, the Northern Territory is a really small population comparatively, but it has an enormous sun, solar potential and solar, you know, energy source. So exporting it to countries like Singapore that do not have the capacity to produce their own energy at this kind of scale is a really great outcome.
Okay, so how are we going for questions, Amy? How many more are left?
There's one more, I suppose it's again related to union. It asks about the Million Jobs Plan, so perhaps this is for Imogen. Does the Million Jobs Plan or similar initiatives have a focus on retraining and reskilling gas and coal workers and transitioning them into renewables?
So the Million Jobs Plan identified about 10,000 jobs that are directly around education, training, reskilling, and research. So I don't know if it was explicitly take a person who works in a coal mine and retrain them in a different job, but you know, there's certainly a lot of potential around that space. But I think, you know, that those sorts of decisions really need to be made by the people who are affected by them and what they want to work in and what sort of areas they want to work in going forward.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm wondering if Caroline Pitcock is on the call. There you are. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi there.
Hi, yeah. So look, from a buildings point of view, where can you see the low-hanging fruit, and what do you think from we should be looking at?
Well, I think Australia has some of the worst buildings, you know, particularly homes, and I imagine a lot of you are at home, working from home or whatever at the moment and feeling very cold and just sitting there thinking, what the hell? So I think that there's a lot of what we need to be doing is designing the new buildings much better, but I think the retrofit segment of the Million Jobs Plan, there's so much work to be done there, and every one of those jobs would be a new job that would need proper training, but then new jobs to go into houses all over Australia and fix them up. And because I think our existing building stock is super important, because there's so much embodied energy in that, and we don't want to keep keep them, and I mean, we can make them so much more comfortable and so much more healthy and so much less expensive to keep comfortable. And I just think that's such a great, and the training of people to do that will benefit, because they'll be skilled then in not only fixing up existing houses, but building new houses and new buildings so much better. So,
right.
Yeah, and I think there's all the architects declare and engineers declare and builders declare climate emergency are kind of really ready and willing to, I think, engage in this, because that's what we've all signed up for. And I think the groundswell of support for all of this is huge.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Caroline.
Pleasure.
Yep. Yeah, so look, I think we're probably going to run a bit out of time here, so we probably just better get back to the main effort. Look, we're trying to see if anyone on the call is interested in basically, if you're not already involved in some sort of project to lower emissions, can you see anything there that you'd like to get involved in? So you've seen the 3 speakers talk. So I guess we can either you can put your details into the chat session and we can follow you up later, or you can do things like contact those numbers are on the screen from the various organisations at time. Yep, but we'll come to that one in a sec. But yeah, get in touch if you haven't already put your details forward. There are 2 quotes I'd like you to think about. One is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that's Margaret Mead. So I think if we think about that one, well, if it's not us that's going to do it, who is? And the second one is, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's an old Chinese proverb. So can I just say now, on behalf of Beyond Zero Emissions, Citizens Climate Lobby and the Climate Council, I'd like to thank you for coming along tonight and for making it such a great success. I'd also like to thank our distinguished speakers, Greg Mullins, Dr. Dennys Angove and Imogen Jubb, and of course, Amy Meehan and everyone else that was involved, Howard and all our co-hosts, et cetera, and we'd like just to take, would you like to bring up that slide, Imogen Butler? Great. So there's some contacts there if you'd like to contact Cities Power Partnerships, and these are the guys that get the councils to get things done. CCL that helps the lobby and keeps our representatives honest, or Beyond Zero Emissions. So there we go. And just finally, there's a couple of events coming up, and one is the CCL annual national conference, which I think Dennys has already shown, and then we have a few BZE things coming up where Christine Rogers hosts our monthly second Thursday of the month meeting here in Newcastle, and on top of that we have researcher on the Hunter, plus we have other research going on which you're welcome to join. So I'd like to thank you all for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you again. So thank you. You can unmute people to say hello, say goodbye. That's right.
See you guys.
Thanks everyone, just saving things, so thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Imogen.